11 Golden Age stars who aged terribly. Number 7 is unreal. The bright lights of Hollywood's golden age turned ordinary people into gods and goddesses, beautiful, immortal, untouchable. But time doesn't care about star power. In fact, sometimes fame accelerates the aging process in ways that shock even the most devoted fans. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on 11 legendary stars whose final years were almost unrecognizable from their glory days. Some aged decades in just a few years. Others made desperate attempts to hold on to youth that backfired terribly. And one, number 7, underwent a transformation so shocking and heartbreaking that witnesses couldn't believe their eyes. These weren't just normal aging processes. These were cautionary tales written across once perfect faces. You've seen their classic films. You've admired their talent and beauty. But what happens when the cameras stop rolling and the unforgiving march of time takes over? What price did these icons pay for their years in the spotlight, and could their stories actually help us understand our own relationship with aging and mortality? Let's find out as we examine the shocking twilight years of Hollywood's brightest stars.
Well, goodbye, everybody. Don't worry about me. I might have gotten in a lot of complications in my life, but that was when I was just practically a kid. Now, I see everything much clearer now.
1. Mickey Rooney. From boy wonder to weathered veteran. Mickey Rooney began his career as America's favorite teenager. Those bright eyes, that boundless energy, that boyish charm. For millions, he was the perfect embodiment of youthful exuberance. Films like Boys Town and the Andy Hardy series made him Hollywood's top box office draw by the early 1940s. He was earning $150,000 per film, astronomical money at the time. But beneath that cheerful exterior, Rooney was living hard and fast. What few people realized was that behind those innocent roles, Mickey was burning the candle at both ends. While the public saw the clean-cut boy next door, Hollywood insiders witnessed his growing appetite for alcohol, gambling, and women. And it wouldn't take long for those excesses to catch up with him. By his early 50s, when many stars were still in their prime, Mickey Rooney looked decades older than his actual age. His face, once so animated and youthful, had become bloated and sagging. The sparkle in his eyes had dulled, replaced by the weary gaze of someone who had seen too much, too soon. What happened? 8 failed marriages certainly didn't help. Each divorce drained him financially and emotionally. His gambling addiction left him bankrupt multiple times. But the real culprit was the unrelenting stress of trying to maintain stardom after his youthful appeal had faded. In one particularly heartbreaking television appearance in the 1970s, audiences gasped when Rooney walked on stage. The man who had once been America's teenager now looked like he could be his own grandfather. His skin hung loose, deeply creased with premature wrinkles. His once athletic frame had grown soft and rounded. The cruel irony? Mickey Rooney would live to the remarkable age of 93, but he spent over half his life looking far older than his actual years, from teenage heartthrob to grizzled grandpa in record time.
There's a barrel of fish in the ocean, there's a lot of little birds in the blue, and neither fish nor...
2. Betty Hutton, the blonde bombshell who vanished. In the 1940s, Betty Hutton lit up the screen with an incandescent energy that few could match. Known as the blonde bombshell, her performances in classics like The Miracle of Morgan's Creek and Annie Get Your Gun showcased her unique blend of comedy, singing, and dancing. Her face radiated a wholesome, all-American beauty. Those perfect features, that million-dollar smile, those expressive eyes that could convey joy one moment and heartbreak the next. But the same intensity that made Betty a star would eventually contribute to her downfall. Behind the scenes, she was battling severe depression and an addiction to prescription pills. The pressure to maintain her image and career pushed her to the breaking point. By the late 1950s, Betty's star had begun to fade, and so had her legendary looks. A series of personal and professional setbacks, failed marriages, career disappointments, financial problems took a devastating toll on her appearance. But the most shocking transformation came in the 1970s, after she had largely disappeared from public view. When Betty resurfaced years later, even dedicated fans had trouble recognizing her. Multiple nervous breakdowns had left visible marks on her once radiant face. A series of botched cosmetic procedures, desperate attempts to reclaim her youthful appearance, had actually accelerated her aging process. Her features, once so perfectly proportioned, now seemed distorted and unnatural. In one rare television interview from 1974, the camera caught Betty in harsh, unforgiving light. The contrast between this tired, strained-looking woman and the vibrant star of just 2 decades earlier was shocking. Her skin appeared paper-thin and tightly stretched. Her eyes, once so expressive, now seemed perpetually surprised, the unfortunate result of surgery that had gone too far. Most tragic of all was Betty's own awareness of her transformation. "I don't look in mirrors anymore," she confessed in one of her final interviews. "The person I see there isn't me. It's not the Betty people remember, and it's not the Betty I want to remember either." She didn't just age, she disappeared behind a mask.
Sensitive down to my fingertips. In fact, these fingers made me the best safecracker in Paris and a virtuoso among the pickpockets.
3. Peter Lorre, the man who became his own shadow. Peter Lorre never fit the conventional Hollywood mold of good looks. With his round face, bulging eyes, and soft-spoken manner, he carved out a niche playing unsettling characters in films like M and Casablanca. But in his youth, there was still something compelling about his appearance, an intensity, a presence that commanded attention despite his small stature. As the years passed, however, Lorre's distinctive features began to morph into something genuinely disturbing. A combination of chronic health problems, morphine addiction, which began after a serious back injury, and heavy drinking accelerated his aging process at an alarming rate. By the 1960s, Lorre had become a shadow of himself, quite literally. His once round face had collapsed inward, with sunken cheeks and dark hollows under his eyes that made him look skeletal. His naturally pale complexion had taken on a sickly, almost gray pallor, and those famous eyes, once merely unsettling, now seemed to bulge even more prominently from his thinning face, giving him the appearance of a man perpetually shocked or frightened. In his final film roles, makeup artists actually had to work to make him look healthier rather than more sinister. The transformation was so complete that when Vincent Price viewed Lorre's body at his funeral in 1964, he reportedly remarked, "He looked so much better dead than alive." It wasn't a cruel joke, but a sad observation on how much suffering had been etched into every line of Peter Lorre's face in his final years. Time didn't take him softly, it dragged him down. 4. Gloria Graham. Beauty destroyed by her own hand. Gloria Graham possessed one of the most distinctive faces of the 1950s film noir. With her pouty lips and sultry gaze, she embodied the femme fatale in classics like The Big Heat and In a Lonely Place. Her unique beauty won her millions of fans, and an Academy Award for The Bad and the Beautiful. But Graham harbored an obsession that would ultimately destroy her looks. She was fixated on her upper lip, convinced it was too thin. This seemingly minor insecurity would lead to one of Hollywood's most tragic beauty disasters. Beginning in the mid-1950s, Graham underwent a series of procedures to plump her upper lip, but she didn't stop at conventional methods. According to Hollywood legend, she began stuffing cotton or tissue under her upper lip to make it appear fuller. Eventually, she turned to surgical options, having fat from other parts of her body injected into her lip. The results were disastrous. By the 1960s, Gloria's once subtle pout had been transformed into a permanently swollen, unnatural shape that distorted her entire face. The lip procedures left her with visible scarring and an asymmetrical appearance that makeup couldn't hide. What's worse, the tissue damage from these repeated interventions left her lip partially paralyzed. In her final film appearances, directors often shot her in shadow or from certain angles to minimize the visible damage. But in person, the transformation was shocking. Nicholas Ray, her former husband and director, reportedly didn't recognize her when they crossed paths years after their divorce. The ultimate irony? Film historians now celebrate Graham's original look as one of the most captivating in cinema history. Her desperate attempt to fix what wasn't broken resulted in permanently altering the very feature that had made her famous. The surgery was supposed to help. It did the opposite.
That's a mistake that will be corrected.
5. Orson Welles, the genius who expanded in all directions. In his youth, Orson Welles possessed a commanding presence. Tall, handsome, with piercing eyes, and a resonant voice that could hold audiences spellbound. When he made Citizen Kane at the age of 25, he wasn't just a directorial genius, he was also a striking leading man with intense good looks and undeniable charisma. But as Welles aged, his appearance underwent one of Hollywood's most dramatic transformations. his weight gain became the stuff of legend. The trim, dashing figure who had terrified America with his War of the Worlds broadcast morphed into a man of truly Falstaffian proportions. By the 1970s, Welles had more than doubled his original weight. His once chiseled features disappeared into a face that seemed to be constantly expanding. His eyes, still penetrating, now peered out from puffy hooded lids. His jawline, once so defined, vanished entirely. Even his voice, though still magnificent, became more labored as his breathing grew heavier. Welles wasn't ignorant of this transformation. He often made self-deprecating jokes about his size, once quipping, "My doctor told me to stop having intimate dinners for 4, unless there are 3 other people." But behind the humor lay genuine health concerns and a profound impact on his career. The weight gain, combined with decades of cigar smoking, heavy drinking, and chronic health issues, aged Welles prematurely. In his 60s, he moved with the labored gait of a man decades older. His skin developed a pallid, unhealthy pallor, and he suffered from exhaustion after even minor exertion. As his appearance changed, Welles became increasingly creative about hiding it. He took to wearing large, flowing black capes and outfits that concealed his size. In television appearances, he would often sit behind desks or be filmed from the chest up. He grew a beard partly to hide his multiple chins. In his later years, he even began using stage makeup in everyday life to give his pallid complexion some color. Perhaps most telling was the reaction when Welles died in 1985 at age 70. Many obituaries noted that he had lived a relatively short life, but few expressed surprise. Looking at photos from his final years, most people assumed he was much older than his actual age. By 60, he looked 85.
Only inconsequential fact.
6. Betty Davis. Those eyes watched everything fade. She had the most incredible eyes. That's what people always said about Bette Davis. And they weren't wrong. Throughout her prime, those famously intense eyes dominated her face, expressing emotions that ranged from smoldering passion to murderous rage. Combined with her distinctive voice and fearless acting choices, Davis created an unforgettable screen presence that earned her 2 Academy Awards and a place among Hollywood's greatest legends. But the years were especially cruel to Bette Davis, transforming her from a commanding presence to a frighteningly frail figure. The decline began with decades of chain smoking, up to 4 packs a day by some accounts. The habit etched deep lines around her mouth and eyes, giving her a permanently severe expression. Then came a series of strokes in the late 1970s and early 1980s. The first, in 1983, partially paralyzed one side of her face and slurred her once crisp diction. When Davis appeared on talk shows in her final years, audiences were often shocked by her appearance. Her once full face had become gaunt and skeletal, with skin that seemed paper-thin and stretched too tight across prominent facial bones. Her famous posture, always so straight and proud, had curved into a permanent stoop. Even her hands, once so expressive in gestures, had become gnarled and trembling. Most shocking of all was her substantial weight loss. In her final film, The Whales of August, 1987, Davis appeared almost spectral, a thin, frail shadow of her former self. Her costumes hung loosely on a frame that seemed barely substantial enough to support them. Director Lindsay Anderson recalled having to shoot numerous takes because Davis lacked the physical strength to perform even simple movements consistently. Yet through it all, those famous eyes remained unchanged, still piercing, still intelligent, still unmistakably Bette Davis. They became even more prominent in her thinning face, creating an eerie contrast. The vibrant, fierce gaze of a legend looking out from the weathered face of a woman who had fought too many battles. Her eyes stayed fierce, but everything else faded fast.
Let forever begin to light among
7. Rita Hayworth. The unbelievable tragedy no one understood. In the 1940s, Rita Hayworth wasn't just famous, she was iconic. Her performance in Gilda created one of cinema's most memorable moments when she tossed back her glorious red hair and captivated audiences worldwide. During World War II, her pinup photo was pasted on more barracks walls and submarine torpedoes than any other star. Her beauty seemed almost otherworldly, perfect features, flawless skin, and a smile that radiated both innocence and seduction simultaneously. But Rita Hayworth's final years would reveal a tragedy so profound that it changed how Hollywood and the public understand aging and illness. The first signs appeared in the 1960s, when Hayworth was still in her 40s. Known for her lightning-quick ability to memorize dialogue and complex dance routines, she suddenly began struggling with her lines. Directors noticed she seemed confused on set, often requiring multiple takes for simple scenes. Many, including Rita herself, attributed these problems to alcohol, as she had developed a drinking habit over the years. But alcohol wasn't the real culprit. By the early 1970s, Hayworth's appearance had changed dramatically. The graceful dancer who once moved with liquid precision now shuffled with an uncertain gait. Her famous face, once so animated and expressive, had taken on a perpetually confused look, eyes vacant, mouth slightly slack. Her weight fluctuated dramatically, and in public appearances, she seemed disoriented, sometimes not recognizing longtime friends and colleagues. The most heartbreaking moment came during a 1976 film shoot, where Hayworth repeatedly forgot her lines and appeared lost on a set filled with people she'd known for years. Production was eventually abandoned. Crew members reported seeing the once greatest sex symbol in the world standing alone, disoriented in her dressing room, unable to recognize her own reflection in the mirror. What the public didn't know, what even Rita herself didn't understand, was that she was suffering from Alzheimer's disease. Decades before it became a widely recognized condition, the diagnosis wouldn't come until 1980, making Hayworth one of the first public figures to put a face to this devastating illness. In her final public appearances, fans were shocked by what they saw. The legendary beauty was now bloated and disheveled, with haunted eyes that seemed to be constantly searching for something just out of reach. Her once perfect features were frozen in a mask-like expression. The famous Hayworth hair, those glorious red locks that had helped make her a star, hung limp and often unwashed, as she could no longer manage her own basic care. The contrast between the vibrant star of CoverGirl and this confused, vulnerable woman was so extreme that many fans thought the photos must be fake or greatly exaggerated, but they weren't. This was the cruel reality of an illness that was stealing Rita's mind while leaving her body intact. By the time of her death in 1987, Rita Hayworth had spent nearly 2 decades in a slow decline, unaware of her own legendary status, unable to recognize her family, and completely disconnected from the woman she had once been. The downfall was so shocking, people thought it was a hoax, but it was very real and heartbreaking.
I must say, it's a pleasure to be here.
8. Montgomery Clift, beauty shattered and reassembled. When Montgomery Clift arrived in Hollywood, his looks were so perfect they seemed almost unreal. With chiseled features, soulful eyes, and a sensitive demeanor, he represented a new kind of male beauty, less rugged than the stars who came before him, more vulnerable and complex. Alongside Marlon Brando and James Dean, he helped redefine masculinity on screen, bringing emotional depth and psychological complexity to his roles. Then came the night that split his life, and his face, in two. On May 12, 1956, after leaving a dinner party at Elizabeth Taylor's home, Clift's car slammed into a telephone pole. The accident shattered his face, breaking his nose and jaw, fracturing his sinus, and leaving him with partial paralysis on the left side of his face. He needed extensive reconstructive surgery, and while doctors did their best, the Montgomery Clift who emerged was visibly different from the one audiences had fallen in love with. The right side of his face remained largely as it had been, handsome, expressive, perfect, but the left side became partially frozen, with a slightly sunken appearance. His mouth sometimes drooped on one side. The symmetry that had made him so striking was gone forever. But the physical changes were only the beginning. To cope with the chronic pain from his injuries, Clift became dependent on alcohol and prescription painkillers. The combination accelerated his aging process at an alarming rate. Within just a few years, he looked decades older. By the early 1960s, only in his early 40s, Clift appeared gaunt and haggard. The skin on his once perfect face had become sallow and loose. Deep lines formed around his eyes and mouth. His body, once athletic and graceful, became thin and frail. He moved like an old man, with stiff, uncertain movements. In his final film, The Defector, 1966, completed shortly before his death at age 45, Clift is almost unrecognizable from the beautiful young man who had starred in From Here to Eternity just 13 years earlier. His face appears sunken, with hollow cheeks and dark circles under his eyes. His skin has a grayish pallor. Even his voice, once so distinctive and compelling, sounds weak and strained. Fellow actors who worked with him in those final years described the experience as watching someone disappear before their eyes. Director John Huston, who had worked with Clift both before and after the accident, remarked that it was like directing two completely different actors. Elizabeth Taylor, one of his closest friends, described his decline as the longest disappearance in Hollywood history, a slow-motion self-destruction that played out on screen and in public for everyone to see.
Experience, I can't answer for anyone else, but we had a meeting before.
9. Janet Leigh, frozen in fear. Janet Leigh screamed her way into cinema history in the shower scene from Hitchcock's Psycho, creating one of film's most enduring moments. In her prime, Leigh possessed a fresh, natural beauty, the perfect combination of the girl next door and the glamorous movie star. Her heart-shaped face, bright eyes, and genuine smile made her instantly likable on screen. But as Janet aged, she made choices that would ultimately turn her face into a cautionary tale for Hollywood actresses. Unlike some stars who aged naturally, Leigh became an early adopter of cosmetic procedures designed to maintain youthfulness. Beginning in the late 1970s, when these techniques were still relatively new, she underwent a series of treatments that would have long-term consequences for her appearance. The problem wasn't just one procedure. It was the combination and timing. Facelifts performed too close together, fillers injected before earlier ones had fully settled, and techniques that hadn't yet been perfected all contributed to a gradual transformation of her once natural features. By the 1980s, fans began to notice the changes. The Janet Leigh who appeared in films and television guest spots looked noticeably different. Her skin appeared unnaturally taut across her cheekbones. Her eyes, once so expressive, now seemed permanently widened, creating an inadvertent look of perpetual surprise or alarm. When she smiled, her face moved in unusual ways, with some parts remaining oddly static while others shifted. The most visible change was in the texture and movement of her skin. The natural elasticity and subtle expressiveness that had made her so compelling on screen had been replaced by a smooth, waxy quality that reflected light differently under camera conditions. Directors who worked with her during this period noted the challenges of lighting her face, as the normal techniques used to highlight expressions no longer worked as expected. What made Leigh's transformation particularly poignant was that it seemed to visually reference her most famous role. With her wide, sometimes startled-looking eyes and tightly drawn skin, she began to resemble someone caught in a permanent state of alarm, not unlike Marion Crane's terror in that infamous shower. In one of her final major public appearances, at the 50th anniversary screening of Psycho in 2010, the contrast between the fresh-faced actress in the film and the woman on stage was striking. While still elegant and poised, her facial movements appeared restricted, her expressions limited to a narrow range. Her eyes screamed, but her face didn't move.
Come now, you've never read an actuarial table in your life, have you?
10. Edward G. Robinson, When the Tough Guy Crumbled. Edward G. Robinson built his career playing tough guys and gangsters, with Little Caesar establishing him as cinema's quintessential mob boss. Despite his short stature and unconventional looks, Robinson possessed a commanding presence, intense eyes, a forceful voice, and distinctive features that made him instantly recognizable. In his prime, Robinson's face was his fortune. Those heavy-lidded eyes, the prominent nose, the determined set of his jaw. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but his face had character, strength, and a unique kind of appeal that worked perfectly for his roles. But the aging process was particularly unkind to Robinson, exaggerated by both lifestyle choices and personal hardships. Robinson was a chain smoker, rarely seen without his trademark cigar both on and off screen. Decades of this habit left their mark on his skin, which began to take on a leathery, deeply creased appearance by his late 50s. The constant squinting through smoke further deepened the lines around his already heavy-lidded eyes. Then there was the matter of his health. Robinson suffered from chronic heart problems that required strong medications, many of which caused side effects including fluid retention. This created a puffy, bloated appearance that became more pronounced in his later years. By the 1960s, Robinson's transformation was dramatic. His face, once so defined and expressive, had become noticeably swollen. His jowls sagged heavily, and pockets of fluid gathered under his eyes. His skin took on an unhealthy pallor with visible discoloration and age spots. Even his posture changed. The once straight stance that had made him seem taller than his 5 feet 5 inches height now curved into a permanent stoop. The final blow came from emotional stress. Robinson faced political persecution during the McCarthy era and was forced to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee. Though eventually cleared, the experience took a visible toll on him. Friends and colleagues noted that he seemed to age years in just months during this period. In his final films, including Soylent Green, 1973, the camera could not hide the extent of his physical decline. The man who had once dominated the screen with his energy and intensity now appeared fragile and exhausted. Makeup artists struggled to restore some of his former vigor, but the results often made him look artificially colored rather than healthy. Most poignant was a comment from director Richard Brooks, who had worked with Robinson in both his prime and his final years. After shooting a particularly difficult scene late in Robinson's career, Brooks reportedly remarked, "The face that launched 1,000 gangsters has run aground. By the end, even the gangster roles stopped calling."
Well, I'd take it out, put something else in.
Yeah.
Sometimes I put extra things in that I knew they were going to take out.
11. Mae West, the woman who refused to age. Mae West made her name with her bold sexuality, curvaceous figure, and risque one-liners. Throughout the 1930s, she was one of Hollywood's most controversial and profitable stars. Her blonde curls, heavily lidded eyes, and signature pout created an instantly recognizable image. But unlike many stars who eventually accept the aging process, Mae West took the extraordinary position that she simply would not participate in it. As she moved into her 60s, 70s, and even 80s, West maintained exactly the same appearance she had cultivated in her 30s. The platinum blonde hair, heavy makeup, revealing costumes, and seductive persona remained frozen in time. But as the years passed, this unchanging image took on an increasingly surreal quality. By the time she appeared in Myra Breckenridge, 1970, at age 77, and Sextet, 1978, at 85, the disconnect between West's age and her presentation had become extreme. Her hair, now a wig, remained in the exact same style she had worn decades earlier. Her makeup grew increasingly heavy. Thick layers of foundation, dramatic eyeliner, and bright lipstick applied well beyond her natural lip line. Most striking was her commitment to playing the same sexually charged characters she had portrayed in her youth. In Sextet, 85-year-old West was cast as a sex symbol desired by men a quarter her age, delivering lines about her insatiable appetite for romance while surrounded by muscular young actors. The visual effect was unsettling. Under harsh studio lights, the heavy makeup cracked and settled into the natural creases of age, creating a mask-like appearance. Her movements, once fluid and suggestive, had become stiff and careful. The famous walk, that swaying, hip-swinging strut, had transformed into a tentative shuffle, though she still attempted to perform it. Perhaps most telling were the production accommodations required for her final film. According to cast members from Sextet, West's eyesight had deteriorated so badly that she couldn't read her script. Her lines were fed to her through a hidden earpiece, resulting in odd pauses and a disconnected delivery. Some scenes had to be shot in fragments because she couldn't physically manage longer takes. The stark contrast between West's carefully maintained image and the reality of her aging created something that audiences found difficult to watch. Critics were brutal. One described her final film appearance as like watching your grandmother perform a striptease. West remained defiant until the end, insisting in interviews that she still felt as young and desirable as ever. When asked about aging, she famously quipped, "I never worried about age. I don't feel like I will ever be an old woman. I'll always be a young woman who has aged." But the camera told a different story. Despite all her efforts, the wigs, the makeup, the carefully controlled lighting, time could not be completely denied. What emerged was neither the young Mae West nor a gracefully aged version, but something else entirely. A strange theatrical approximation of youth that called more attention to her age than simply embracing it would have done. She didn't age, she refused, and it showed.